Hi, it's Chet here from Bellinger. I'm at our Shirley's Tavern bamboo rod making shop where we turn reel seats, make our bamboo fly rods, and teach our bamboo rod making classes, finishing out strips for a 7'9" 3-piece 5-weight that I'm making for a customer. And while switching over from butts to mids, I decided that it'd be an ideal time to take a break and talk to you a little bit more about planing forms, especially the new people out there. And perhaps maybe pay it forward and provide some information that'll help you make a better decision about planing forms. You see, there's a lot of thought that goes into a precision-made form. It's not just a piece of metal with a groove cut down the center of it. And all of us come into the craft green. We don't know what we don't know, and our skill set is fairly low. That's the time when you want to think about what your skill set's going to be like in the future when it comes to planing forms. What kind of planing form are you going to need as you advance through the craft? Because at some point, you're going to get to where you've mastered the craft. You've become as good as you possibly can be. And it's at that point when you're really going to appreciate the fine nuances of a precision-made planing form. So, I'm going to readjust the camera, and I'm going to talk about some things. I'm going to talk about how the form's constructed, how the groove's laid out, how it's machined. I'm going to talk about the adjustment stations, and I'm going to tie it all in with some of the basics that we teach our students in our rod making classes in terms of methodology and fundamentals of planing. So, in a few seconds, I'll be right back, and we'll be able to talk in more detail about planing forms. Now that I've repositioned the camera, you can see that I've placed two planing forms on the bench. On your left is a swelled butt planing form that shows the swell that we machine into the bottom end on the butt side of the form. And here on the tip side of the form, you can see the fine groove that we machine in the tip side of the form. And I'd like to talk about 4 things that you should consider when it comes to getting a planing form. You should think about how it's constructed, think about the adjustment stations, how the grooves machined into the form, and how the overall dynamics of the form work into proper planing fundamentals. What you see here are 2 bars, a 3/4 inch wide by 1 1/4 inch thick by 72 inches long of 1018 cold rolled steel. We like cold rolled steel because it's available in the widths and thicknesses that we use. It's very machinable, it's stable, and it's a mild steel, so when you strike the block plane blade into the edge of the form, you don't damage the block plane blade. The 2 bars are mated together and held in alignment along the center line with dowel pins. Once they're mated together to create the planing surface, the forms are precision ground, uniformly flat and parallel. This is critical. The resulting 1.5 inch wide planing surface is ideal for centering a common block plane over the top of the planing form and centering it over the top of the bamboo. When the inevitable crash occurs, you strike the block plane blade into the edge of the planing form and not its surface. We like the 1.25 inch thick because we're going to lose some percentage of thickness in the surfacing process, and we want to maintain as much space between the planing surface and the top of the adjustment screws as possible. This is where you get big strip capability, where you can make spay rods and switch rods. You don't want to be limited on how big a strip you can make within reason. The 72-inch length is hard to speak about unless you talk about the groove, but let's say that the 72-inch length provides you with all kinds of room to run 50 and 55-inch long strips and still have adequate space on the top of the form, in the bottom of the form for proper planing fundamentals where you want to have a space to follow through on your planing stroke. The adjustment stations that we use are the push-pull style. We use 2 hex wrenches to open up the form and manipulate the dimension at the adjustment station. You take your standard depth gauge, calibrate it using your standard. Place the gauge, the appropriate place at the adjustment station, and you can see by manipulating the wrenches, I can easily open and close the planing form. So let's say I want to set the form at 42 thousandths, which is right here on the dial indicator. I'm going to walk it open by pushing the form open, and as I get close to the dimension, I begin tightening the form, and as I feel the pressure between the two wrenches increase, I push it open, and now I've locked it in right at 42 thousandths. That's how easy it is to set the taper into an adjustment station. The type of hardware we use at the adjustment station is the best hardware suited for the job. You have a 3/8 inch by 5/16 coarse thread screw shoulder bolt that's used primarily in fixturing applications, in non-threaded rotational applications where you insert the bolt and it reaches through to the other side, engages in the thread, and as you tighten the bolt, it draws the form, the two sides of the form together. To push it apart, we use a 3/4 cap head screw with fine threads. And to reduce the amount of surface contact between the end of the bolt and the planing form bar, we insert a 1/4 inch steel ball bearing. By reducing the surface contact, we reduce the amount of effort that's needed to open up the planing form. This is, among other things, made it easy to adjust the form, but it also cuts down on the amount of opportunities where we pitch the dial indicator depth gauge off the side of the form. When we're talking about the groove, one of the things that you have to look at is there a discernible slope in the form? Do you have a 5/1000ths of an inch drop between the adjustment stations? What we have here is 45 thousandths, 40 thousandths, 35 thousandths, 30 thousandths. The one I adjusted, 25 thousandths, and 20 thousandths. So you have a 5/1000ths of an inch drop between the adjustment station. That's good. We cut our groove with a CNC mill. We found that we want to make the groove as precise as possible. We find that the more precise the groove, the more reliable the taper, especially in between the adjustment bolts. When we're cutting out the groove, the placement of the groove is this is our starting point here. We target 15 thousandths. We want to go to 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. One of the things that's important is you want your groove to be square and plumb to the surface of the form. That's why the surfacing process step is so important. So, as we go down between the adjustment stations, we start at 15 thousandths, we stop at 85 thousandths. It's very common to flip the form over and start at 85 here and go to 90, 95, and 100. We don't do that. We start at 45 thousandths, so we go down to 85, and then we come back up to 45, 50, 55, 60. And the reason we do that, and I'll demonstrate, it provides a lot more options, especially when you're making the midsections on 3-piece rods. So, I have a strip here to demonstrate that I'm going to plane out for my 7'9" 3-piece rod. It's a 5-weight. And the strip is 36 inches long. Let's say the tip dimension of the ferrule dimension of the tip is 78 thousandths. So if I cut the groove starting here at 80, 85, there isn't any place I really can run that strip on this side, on the butt side of the form. So I'm left to running it on the tip side of the form. And if I follow good planing form practices, I want to hold the tip end of this strip with as much of the groove as possible. So at 78 thousandths, I want to be somewhere around 75 or 70 when I'm holding this tip. Unfortunately, if I'm limited by the groove to only placing that strip here at the bottom end of the form, I run the 36th length runs off the end of the form. So if I can't run it on the butt side of the form, I have to bring that strip up on the tip side into a location on the form where I'm not holding it with the greatest percentage of the groove. So that's why when you flip our form over and we start at 45-50, 55-60, 65-70, 75, you can run with the greatest percentage of groove holding that 78 thousandths dimension and still have plenty of space on the back end of the form for follow through with your block plane, and you have plenty of space up here to follow through with the block plane. So those are some things that you should know about planing forms. There's width, planing surface, uniformly flat and precision ground. You have thickness that lends to your large strip capability. You have adjustment screws that are easy to manipulate using hardware that's intended for the purpose. You have a discernible drop in the groove. It's precision machined on a CNC mill, and that you have the groove starts and stops in locations that gives you versatility and lends support to proper planing technique in terms of holding the strip and where you can place the strip relative to the groove on the form. Those are some of the things that I think are of concern when you're looking at buying a planing form. Should you have any questions, please contact me through our website, www.genuinebellinger.com, regarding anything about planing forms or any of the other equipment that we make.